The Digital Divide, Proof from Maps and a Social Campaign Presentation by Joseph McHugh. The 4 countries I chose were Japan, Oman, Switzerland, and Egypt. You can see them on the map here. Here's Switzerland, Oman, Egypt, and Japan all the way over here. The sellers are subscriptions per 100 people for my 4 countries. You can see in the chart here, in the beginning of 1990, Switzerland and US ranked towards the top, but the world was still under 1. And then here in the year 2016, Oman is actually on the top, Switzerland is second, the US and Japan followed close behind. Egypt's one of the lowest ones out of the countries I chose. And then overall in the world, we still have 100 subscriptions, over 100 subscriptions per 100 people. I found the data for 1985, but in 1990 I saw that the US had 2 per 100 and Switzerland almost 2 per 100. The other countries just started using their technology as well. Oman, the world itself, and Egypt were still very low, but by the year 2016 you could see that there's 100 plus subscriptions for the world and all the countries. When did at least 1 per 100 people have a subscription? Switzerland was the highest. Already had 64. This was by the year 2000. Japan was close behind. You could see I added high income, which is right below Switzerland and Japan, still higher than the United States total, and then the lower income is still all the way towards the bottom there. The graph here is pretty neat to show that for high income it was more likely for people to have a subscription, where lower income is definitely a lot lower. Oman's towards the bottom, Egypt's even lower. The world is pretty much average, sitting at around 38. But yeah, Switzerland, Japan, and the United States was far above anything else. The percentage of the population for each country using the internet in 2016, Japan and Switzerland, again, higher than most. US is actually third in this situation. Oman's at 69, the world's still only at 45, and then Egypt's even lower than that. So what year did at least 1 per 100 people utilize the internet? It was by 2001, all 4 countries had at least 1. Egypt was still only sitting at 1, so that's why I stopped at the year 2001 when looking it up. Switzerland was the highest again. The US was at 49, Japan at 38, and Oman low at 6. The richer countries that contain more content started using the internet first. But I believe the digital divide is shrinking. Looking at this data, there's still a divide, and there's still a lot we can do to shrink that divide, but technology is being made more available and more affordable overall. My plan is to start a Kickstarter to raise funds for shrinking the digital divide. In the past couple of years, smartphone ownership rates have increased in many countries, and I thought this was a neat fact. I pulled from the resource I use. There's increases of over 25% points among the total population, and this is why I believe the divide is shrinking. And in large emerging economies such as Turkey, Malaysia, Chile, and Brazil, we have major increases throughout time. The digital divide is still a critical factor to education and available resources, but is shrinking over time. The chart to the right shows a percentage of smartphone ownership where the average of the world is over 100 per 100 users. So we could see the digital divide is still something that can shrink further with additional resources and support. There's a lot of countries on here that don't have any data. They're blanked out in white here. For example, we don't have any data for North Korea, but South Korea is pretty high as far as smartphone ownership. Australia is pretty high, US, Italy, Spain, some European countries. But then we got a lot of countries that are a lot lower. Good portion of the African countries are pretty low. South Africa is actually the highest in Africa. And then we can see that Israel, Jordan are pretty high up there. South America is starting to get up there. Still pretty low considering the rest of the world. Mexico is still pretty low, but doing research you could see that there's a lot of funding and resources being put towards actually shrinking the digital divide, and my plan of action is to contribute to that. The main factors in a digital divide includes lack of capital in countries. Poorer countries are less likely to have access to internet or own a smartphone than countries with higher incomes. There's also a divide in lower and higher class citizens in general, not even counting the country, but as you could see in the graph I showed earlier, high income is way higher than lower income, and that's a big part of the digital divide. There's also the factors of gender and age. It was proven that males have more smartphones and internet access than women, and then older people are still lower than millennials as far as the digital divide. So as time goes on, I think that'll shrink a lot as people get educated and more content's available for all ages and genders. And then I brought another fact from the resource I use. In a number of emerging and developing countries, more people have access to the internet and are also using it more frequently. In 12 emerging nations surveyed in 2014 and 2015, there were significant increases in the share of adult internet users who say they access the internet several times a day. And that included Nigeria, Ghana, China, and that's why I believe the digital divide is shrinking, but there's still a lot we could do to shrink it even further. Here are two graphs that I brought down from my resource. You could see by continent here, over to the left that use internet, and then over to the right that actually own a smartphone. North America's towards the top in both of them, and then a lot of the green dots you see for Africa kind of expresses why that continent's still on its way, still part of the digital divide. And then you have like Europe and Asia, Russia in the middle here, so Middle East is even up there too. But you can see that the digital divide is shrinking, but mainly Africa and Asia. Asia's lower, but Asia is up here as well. But yeah, mainly Africa is a main part of the digital divide. And here's my reference. It was a really great resource. It had a lot of good graphs and a lot of good points. It definitely expressed that the digital divide is shrinking, but notes a lot of factors to that, and then shows things that prove that the digital divide is shrinking. But of course, with a Kickstarter and more resources and affordability coming to technology, I'm going to see the digital divide shrink even further. Thank you.